Today, I'm going to be showing you step by step on how I built this web application called thankfulthoughts.io. Thankfulthoughts.io helps you generate a sentence of gratitude for an option that you select. It is a single-page application and has a simple interface that anybody can use. This project was built using Next.js 13, Vercel, Chakra UI, as well as OpenAI's API to access ChatGPT's models to generate a response. Hi everybody, my name is Hosna and I make weekly web development videos on new topics that I've discovered and that I want to share. Today I'm really excited to show you step by step on how I built this web application. You can use the foundations of this video to create whatever other idea that you have. So let's get started. Before we start coding, we are going to need to generate an API key from OpenAI's website. In order to do that, you need to go to the OpenAI website, log in. If you don't have an account, create an account. Once you are logged in, you are going to navigate to your View API keys, which is under the avatar. If you click on that, you're going to go there. Once you get to this page, you are going to click on Create New Secret Key. Now, the reason why we need an API key is in order to access the models, we have to be authenticated, and to do that, we have to use these keys. You're going to copy this key and put it somewhere safe, put it in a text file for now temporarily, do not lose it. If you do, you could go back to this page and generate a new one. We're going to need it for our environmental variable in our project. A quick side note, if you go to usage, when you create an OpenAI account, they give you a free trial usage, so you have $18 to spend. Make sure to keep aware of this. This one expires on May 1st. After it expires, whenever you try to use any of your requests or any of the APIs, it doesn't fetch the data. So that's just something to be aware of. But for now, for this project, I'm just using the free trial. Now that we have our API key, we could go ahead and create our project. We're going to go through the same process that I went through in one of my previous videos, which I will link in the description. We are going to be creating our Next.js app. And to do that, we are going to do npx create next app. I called it Thankful Thoughts. Yes with TypeScript, yes, no, and yes with the app directory. We're gonna wait until it finishes. So it finished building our repo, and I'll bring it to the screen right here and open it on VS Code right now. Here's my project open in Visual Studio Code. What we are going to do is we are going to add all the libraries that we are going to be using. So the first ones are the ones from Chakra UI. So we are going to wait until that loads. Then the next group of packages we are going to install is we're going to do npm install. And we are going to install them and wait until they're done. And the last group that we're going to install, OpenAI. Now that we got all our libraries installed, we could do an npm run div to see our application right now. I'm gonna do a side by side. Now that we have our project running, we could go ahead and manipulate it. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add the Chakra provider. We have to import Chakra provider, and we are going to put it inside our layout page. I'll put it right here, and then wrap our child component around the Chakra provider. Once you have that, we can go ahead and remove the global.css and page modules.css files. And we are going to see an error in our web application. Let me close this. If we try to reload it, it will give us an error. So we have to go ahead and remove all the instances where globals.css is referenced. So I'm going to delete it here. In layout, as well as delete it in page. We don't need these. And then also it's being referenced within the code, so I'm going to delete this. And then say hello world or something. So now when we load it, we get this error, and we have to add this use client to each one of our pages, which is our layout, as well as our page. And once we do that, everything should be okay. Now, once we got that settled, the next thing we are going to work on is our nav bar and footer. So to do that, we are going to create our components folder. and we are going to create our navbar file and our footer file. I'll do a current placement holder right now. So I'll do that. Now we are going to add these to our layout page. And in order to do that, we have to import our navbar and footer. And they go around children. So navbar is going to go on top. And our footer is going to go on the bottom. Now, when we refresh the page, we should have navbar on top and footer on bottom, and then hello world in the center to be our content. Once we have these components inside our layout, the next thing we are going to do is style them. The first one we are going to style is navbar. I already wrote the code for navbar and footer, so I'll just be pasting it in and going over what's in the code. At the top of the code, you see we have imported some components from our libraries. And the next thing, we have our navbar function, and as you can see, we are using our use color mode to handle the light and dark theming. So if I do this, the color of the whole entire screen changes. So that controls that. Box just represents the size of the navbar. And depending on what size, this is the responsive area if you want to change it. So for example, if I want the space in between these items to be more, then I could do something like 50 and then it spreads it out more. But be careful for these, make sure that you look at the documentation and see what items are acceptable, because if you do something like 60, it gets all wonky. So right now I'm gonna go back to 100. Right here controls the color of the background. So right now it's in light mode, right now it's at 50. If I do something like 200, it will change it to something darker. So you could go around and alter whatever you want to play around with it and learn. And in this section, it acts like a flex box. So this box goes to one side here, and this other portion goes to this side right here, and that's controlled by the CSS that is embedded inside these components. That's it for navbar. Then I will go to footer and copy and paste the code that I have for that and go over it. So here's my code for footer. So I'm getting an error. There is one library I forgot to install, and that is called React Icons. So I'm gonna stop the program right now and install npm install React Icons. And once I do that, I will do an npm run div again, and let's hope that that error goes away. So if I refresh the page, our footer should show up, so which it is showing up. Now to go to the top, similar to navbar, we have our imports at the top. So we are importing these from our libraries that we installed. The next thing that we have is our social button constant, which is referenced within our footer function. You could go look at this in more description if you want, but this just sets the styling for these buttons right here. And that's one of the cool things that I learned about TypeScript as I'm learning it. You can add data types to your props, which is pretty cool. So when we go further down, like I mentioned, this is the footer function and this is the layout for the footer function. The box is the color area right here. So if we change the value here, then that would also change, as you saw right here. And like I said, you could play around with it and the sizing as well. And here's the text section right here. This is the copyright, as well as our buttons on the right side corner right here. And that's all the code that there is for footer. Now I'm gonna close some of these tabs so it gets less crowded. Now I'm going to be going over the content section of the web app, similar to what I did with navbar and footer, and just go over the code. So I'll just paste in the code and I'll go back to the top. And now we have our user interface. Now at the top, I have all the imports that we will be using. We are importing items from Formik, from Chakra, and from this special Chakra UI library. Then if we go inside our function for home, this variable right here is going to be the output that the user is going to be seeing. This constant initial values is going to be used inside the Formik component, which you'll see in a second. This async function is what is used in order to send the input from the user to the handler that we will be working on in a second to generate a request to then later on receive a response. That response is then decoded and saved into our gratitude variable. Then we have our handle submit function. We are passing it in a few parameters depending on the user's input. Depending on what the user selects, we have to send it a different prompt to ChatGPT. So each category has a specific prompt that I wrote up. Here is the logic behind what is being sent. We are checking if a certain category is selected, and if it is, we are then passing it that prompt with the parameters that were used. And then now in our return statement, that's mostly our UI. We are then using, like I mentioned, Formic for our form handling. Like I said in the beginning, this is the initial values that are passed. When we refresh the page, the form needs a specific input so it could default to. Then on our handle submit, we are sending the values that we are grabbing from the form to that handle submit function that we just saw. And then afterwards, we are resetting our form. So if we don't have this, then our form gets stuck in this holding position and we have to refresh the page in order for it to get held up. Right here, we are passing these props from Formic into our form. Now this section of the form gets interesting. Now this portion of the form will always be in the UI. This little drop down represents that right there. And when you select a specific value, this value, pet is equal to this value, you see that our inputs change. And that's happening in here, in this location. We are doing a little bit of logic. We are checking if our category is equal to a specific value. And if it is, we are passing it a specific input. If we select pet, that means we want it to pass this form, and then similar to the other ones. And the code inside these braces with this condition statement help control that logic. And at the end of that, we have a button that is tied to our submit function. So then when we press this button, then it performs the functions that we ask it to do in this area right here. And on the bottom, we see outside of the form, right beneath the box, this is going to be our output section. So when someone enters something, then this is going to be shown beneath our form. Now, if we try inputting something right now, nothing's going to show yet because we haven't set up our handlers and our backend yet. So we will go do that right now. We need to create our environmental variable. So we're gonna go to new file, we're gonna type in .env. Then we are going to go to our get_ignore file and we are going to include that .env inside here. So then when we push it to GitHub, it will not show there. We're going to go back to env and we are going to create a variable called OpenAPI key. Now that key that you saved before, you are going to paste it inside here. Now once you have put your key inside your .env file, we are going to create two files. The first one is going to be inside our API folder and we type generate.ts. We could delete that other hello.ts file. And the next file we're going to create is going to be inside a folder called utils, and we're going to call it something like AI stream. So the first file we are going to be working on is the AI stream. This is going to be called within our generate.ts file inside our API. So I'm going to be copying in the code and just going over it. So we are importing some components from our event source parser. Then we need to initialize our OpenAI stream payload with the proper types and properties. Then we have this async function called OpenAI stream, which is then going to be called in our API. And I'm going to be copying in the code for generate. And if we go to the top, you see that we have imported specific libraries. We are using specific handlers. We are calling specific functions from this file that we just inputted code into. We are checking if we have our Open API key, and if it's not there, we are going to receive an error message. And this is the handler. As you can see, we are reading in the prompt that we sent it from our front end. Then we are checking if there was information inside of it. And if everything looks good, then we go to the payload section and put everything inside Here, the model that we are selecting is the Text DaVinci 003. That's the ChatGPT. Then what we're doing is we're sending this payload. These are all the parameters that OpenAI needs in order to do its calculations and then receive a response back. We put it inside this function that we imported, the OpenAI stream. We pass in the payload and then we wait for the response. And then we're taking this response and putting it inside this readable stream. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly what this is doing, but from my assumption, what it looks like, it's taking the data and it is parsing it. So then it could be sent in a more readable format that could then be fed into our front end. So then if we go back to our front end, if we go back to our page, go down, all of that is then being read into our front end, and we're taking that data, then decoding it on our end and storing it inside our gratitude variable. So if we try it out for ourselves, we could type in a name like Sam, press generate, and then we'll see an output on the bottom. Like I mentioned before, this section right here is what's being displayed on the bottom right here. And if you want to try a different item, let's say have a dog and Pluto and generate a thought, you see the form gets reset and then it gives us an output. I am grateful for Pluto because he brings me unconditional love and companionship. Now this code is available on my GitHub. I have all the links that I have talked about in the description below. If you want to take more look at and dissect the code yourself, feel free to. But it's very important to take a look at documentation and try to understand the flow and test out things until you see that something works. Now, once you feel that your app is in a good position to then be deployed, what you can do is we are going to stop this. Take the repository that you just created, and we are going to be pushing it onto GitHub. So here's my repository in GitHub. If you want to fork it, you're more than welcome to. Now, once you have it on your account, what you are going to do next is that you are going to go to Vercel. You are going to go to add new project. Then you are going to select the project that you just imported into GitHub and import it into Vercel. Once you do that, don't forget to include your environmental variables. This is where you put your OpenAI key. So you are going to paste the name, you're going to take your API key, and then you are going to deploy. Now, I've already had this project deployed. I am just doing it again just to show you the process. But once it's done building, I will come back. So hopefully you see the screen and you have successfully deployed your web application. You could then continue on to the dashboard and then go to the domain that it's asking you to, and then try it out. And it should generate for you a response. If you want to add your own personal domain, what you can do is you could go to View Domains, you click on Edit, and you enter in your domain. Now, to get a domain, you could go to websites like namecheap.com or name.com, but I'm going to go to hostinger.com. So here's hostinger.com. You could go to domain and click domain search. You can name it whatever you want. So for instance, for this example, I'll call it Thankful Thoughts, right? And see if it's available. As you can see, this one is taken. So you can look at the other options you have with different extensions. So for this example, I could choose add to cart for the .xyz extension. So you get to this checkout screen and it tells you for 1 year you are paying $199 for this domain. If you don't have an account, you would create an account. So I already have a domain name that's registered. So I'll log into my account and show you what my panel looks like and what you need to do in order to connect it to Vercel. So here's a domain that I have. Once you make this purchase, you go to your domain and you go to the DNS/name server side, and you must change your name servers to these ones right here. Once you change these name servers, then if you go back to your project and add that new domain that you just purchased, and then wait a few minutes to maybe a couple hours, then your domain name should be updated. And then that's how you add a custom domain to your project. And this is an optional part of the video. If you want to add website analytics to your web application, check out my latest video, adding web analytics using Umami and Railway. Thank you for watching. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comment section below, as well as share what projects you come up with. I would love to see what you've built. See you next time.